Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. It means a lot to me that you would choose to come out and spend some time with me and listen to me talk about caring for your fellow developers. So today, I want to start by telling you a story. And in the story is a software engineer named Taylor. Taylor is working on an ambitious new JavaScript application, and they're super excited about the project. But as often happens, it's a few months behind schedule, and his team just had to spend a long week wrapping up a big feature for the project. And now it's a Monday, and on this particular Monday, Taylor is feeling extra worn out because he had to deal with some family problems over the weekend. He really wants to take a day off to kind of rest and recuperate, but he doesn't have any vacation time, and he knows the rest of his team is working hard as well. So he decides to tough it out and heads into the office. First thing he does when he gets there is check on that pull request he opened on Friday. He sees he has a review. And so, like any good developer, he says, I'm gonna go check these comments. But there's only one comment left by a senior engineer on the team, and it says, this won't work. That's it, nothing else. Since Taylor started his day pretty frustrated, he's already pretty tired. He's beginning to feel some frustration already. But he moves on. Even though he's thinking to himself, well, why won't this work? Like, this is what was asked, and I worked hard on it. But he moves on. He has his first meeting of the day coming up. It's a one-on-one with his manager. He gets to the meeting early with the expectation that he'll be able to talk about some of the frustrations he's been having with the way the project's been run. But as soon as his manager gets to the meeting, he says, so, have you finished feature X yet? This feature was supposed to be delivered the previous week, but due to complicated issues with other teams, it never got done. And so they spend their entire meeting talking about that. This leaves Taylor thinking to himself, no, it's not finished, but that's not really what I wanted to talk about. But it's lunchtime now. And so he kind of brushes it off, heads to lunch, and thinking, it's Monday, maybe my coworkers have some cool weekend stories to share, get my mind off tech and work for a little bit. But by the time he gets to the lunch table, because his meeting ran a little late, his coworkers are already deep in conversation. Did you hear about NewThing.js, the latest JavaScript framework? Taylor's thinking to himself, no, I haven't heard about this. Oh, great. This is yet another thing that I need to go learn. Feeling really fatigued with all this JavaScript churn. So after lunch, he kind of just sulks back to his desk. He says, okay, I want to avoid any more frustration, any more annoyances today, and I'm just going to work, kind of avoid people. And so he can't quite get into flow with his work. And so he checks his emails, checks Twitter a bunch, and then finally the clock hits 6. And he says, okay, I can go home now, even though the rest of his team is still working. How many of you have ever had a day like Taylor just did? Good, a good number of you. So that's not good, but it means that you'll understand. A day where you kind of feel worn down, defeated, right? Like you don't really have a support system in place. And all the little annoyances just kind of build up until they're overwhelming and you don't really feel like you want to be there. So I know I've had plenty of days like this. And so that is why I'm here to talk to you today. My name is Trent Willis. I'm a senior UI engineer at Netflix currently. And today I want to talk about a skill that I believe is incredibly crucial and important in our industry, but often undervalued and definitely not talked about a whole lot. That is the ability to care for your fellow developers. See, the tragic aspect of Taylor's story and others like it is that this one discouraging day can easily turn into weeks or months of feeling burnt out at work. And so while the individual issues that were encountered here are minor on their own, when you deal with them consistently over long periods of time, or even just for a short period of time, but really frequently, then it can be really frustrating. And this results in lost productivity for your team, lower team morale for the overall team, and potentially, if they compound enough, the loss of a good employee. And so what if that day had gone differently? How could the interactions that have occurred between Taylor and his coworkers have been made better, even without them knowing exactly what was going on in Taylor's personal life or going through his mind in that exact moment? That's what we're going to explore for the remainder of this talk. So let's start by looking a bit closer at that first word, caring. In context, it's an action. It's not a state of being, but rather it's something which you perform. Caring is an action, but oftentimes when talking with developers or even managers, We don't talk about it in that way. We talk about high-level, abstract terms like being a caring person or being an emotionally intelligent leader, but rarely do we speak to the actual actions and thought processes that we think denote someone that is caring. But there is good news here, and that is that since caring is an action, that means that there are specific acts, specific thought processes we can talk about, and that means that we can practice them. We can get better at them, and we can encourage each other and go on this journey together. So now's a good time for me to mention, I'm not really a caring person by nature. I'm an introvert, and that I get drained from interacting with others. And so being supportive, especially during emotional times, can be really hard for me. I also tend to like to keep to myself and can have a hard time relating to some other folks. I'm sure at least some of you in this audience know what that's like. But I've also been tremendously lucky in that I've worked with coworkers and wonderful people that have called me out on this. And they have encouraged me and pushed me to strive to be better at it. So now I look at it this way. I respect my limitations, but I don't use them as an excuse. Right? I know that I'll need to put in a little bit of extra effort to care for others, but that's no reason for me not to do it. We're all humans first and developers second. And I definitely put lots of effort towards being a better developer. So it's only reasonable that I can put in at least a little bit of effort towards being a better person and a better teammate. So it doesn't matter what your personality is. We can't use that as an excuse to not try to care for our teammates. And instead, we should work together and encourage each other to move past our own individual limitations. So with that in mind, let's dive into some practical ways that we can get better at caring together. So first up, I want to talk about reviews. Whether they're code reviews, design reviews, product reviews, or what have you, the process of reviewing decisions and getting feedback about those decisions is a relatively regular part of most developers' work. Right? So it's unfortunate that these processes are often stressful for developers. So last year, Vaidehi Joshi, who's a software engineer at Tilda, conducted a survey about code reviews. In it, she found some mixed results. But there were strong signals that many developers had some negative associations with the review process. So she put together a talk and a subsequent article called Crafting Better Code Reviews. And in it, she summarizes a number of things that we can do to improve the code review experience specifically. And I would encourage you all to go read the article or watch her talk if you have time. But when it comes to talking about caring for our developers, there's really only one area that we need to focus on. And that is the interpersonal and emotional aspects of the review process. These are nuanced areas that I'm pretty sure we all know exist, but we usually don't talk about when we talk about our review process. And we definitely don't codify them into how we think about it. So in our article, Vaidehi groups these under the header, the harder things, but the most important. So the question is, why are these the harder things, and why are they the most important when it comes to the review process? Well, it's because they're almost entirely about people, or more specifically, they're about people and communication. And we all know that communication is hard. Whether it's communicating ideas, feedback, or critiques, effective communication between a reviewer and a reviewee is really the avenue by which reviews derive their value. If I leave a review comment for you that's just looks good to me or LGTM, that doesn't tell you a lot about your work, right? What's good about it? Did you even really look at it? Like if you can't comment on anything at all, like how do I know that I'm getting value from you reviewing this? Or is it simply a process-driven thumbs up? So clear communication here is a really critical part of the review process. It provides opportunities for us to learn from each other, to teach each other, to gauge our own work and our skills. And in some cases, it might be the only actual communication we're having with certain teams if we're submitting pull requests to an external repo. So how do we incorporate care into these processes? How do we incorporate care into our communication? Well, there are many ways, and I definitely don't try to solve all interpersonal communication problems during this talk, but I want to focus on one area, and that is your tone. So my first tip is be mindful of your tone. And by that, I mean actively think about the tone that you're using and conveying when you speak to your teammates. Many, if not all of us, have at one time or another interacted with coworkers who are really detached or just really negative or condescending in the way that they communicate. And just as that is a drain in face-to-face communication, it's also a drain when it's left in a review or any other form of written communication. So as a brief example, I was once working on a project that was supported by a really skilled infrastructure team. The developers on the main project would often defer to this infra team because they had lots of experience and expertise. But some members of the infra team came across as a bit aloof and condescending when they were reviewing the decisions and the code choices made by developers working on the project. And so because of this, the developers on that project began to actively avoid that infra team. And due to that, the project ran into several technical issues that they likely could have avoided, simply because they didn't have the insight of these more experienced developers. And so the outcome here is that the tone and communication style of just a few individuals on one team wound up having a large impact on this project. So what can you do to make sure that stuff like this doesn't happen? Well, to start, if you've never really put thought into the tone that you use when you communicate, a good first step is simply ask your coworkers for some feedback. This can be geared specifically at your review comments or your emails or just in general. And to go one step further, you should probably ask them what they think that you can do to improve your communication. Chances are they will have something for you. Oftentimes, we don't even realize that we're using negative tones until someone points it out to us. But most folks don't like unsolicited advice about how they communicate. And so it's up to us to really be proactive and to start some self-evaluation, and hopefully that will encourage and spur on those that are around us to do the same. So it's also important to note here, though, that you may need to do this more than once. Right? You're gonna be interacting with a lot of different teams, and every team is made up of unique people. And because of that, your communication style may have to vary from team to team. And so we need to work to ensure that we're not letting this detachment of communicating to everyone through the internet and through our computers translate into us thinking that everyone we're communicating with communicates in exactly the same fashion, because that's just not true. So my challenge to you for this week is to simply think about your communication style a bit and ask one person, just one person, to give you some feedback on it. If you could do that, it's a great first step towards showing that you care about how you're interacting with your teammates. Beyond soliciting feedback, though, I also have some simple guidelines that I keep for myself to help me structure review comments and other written communication. Those guidelines are: ask questions often, explain frequently, and never decree. By asking questions, we acknowledge the rationality and intelligence of the person on the other end of our reviews. Right? And by explaining, we leave less room for there to be misinterpretation, and we share more context and potential learning opportunities with each other. And by not decreeing, we avoid coming across as condescending or out of touch with the other developers that we work with. So applying these guidelines, how might that code review from the start of Taylor's day have looked? Well, instead of saying, "This won't work," his coworker may have instead said, "Can you explain why you approached it this way? I'm not sure this will work because," and then insert whatever his rationale is. This approach does several things. First, by asking a question about the approach, it acknowledges that Taylor's intelligent. He had to have some reasons for why he chose to approach the problem the way he did. He's not just a mindless drone. And second, by explaining why he doesn't think the approach will work, it provides context from the reviewer's viewpoint that Taylor might have been missing as he was implementing the feature. Or, at the very least, it's gonna let Taylor see where the reviewer's missing context that he had as he was implementing the feature. And then finally, there's no flippant decree being made about whether this will work or won't work. It shows that time and care were put into evaluating and reviewing the hard work that Taylor had done. So the only real drawback here is that it will have taken the reviewer slightly more time to construct his comment, but really that's the minimum we should be expecting of folks that are conducting reviews, right? If communication is how we derive value out of our review process, then we need to make sure that we're communicating clearly and not just doing it quickly. So to recap, we should ask questions often, explain frequently, and never decree. These are 3 simple guidelines that I have personally found to really improve clarity and reduce tensions when conducting reviews or any sort of technical conversation, really. Now, there's a lot more that I could say about communication, but I want to end with just one more tip for this section of the talk, and that is make opportunities for praise. That is to say, there is a place for praise in the review process, even when you have to disagree with each other or potentially argue about exact implementation details. So a constant barrage of critiques and technical comments is really draining, right? A little bit of positivity and encouragement can help restore that energy and then some. And so if nothing else, simply drop in a comment like, great job, or thanks for all the hard work from time to time. It's not that hard. This goes doubly so if you are a lead engineer or someone in a senior position, right? Your words matter. And so practice being positive, especially towards those that might be looking up to you. I have seen entire career trajectories change for the better for junior engineers simply because there was a senior engineer that expressed praise to them. It meant that they had someone that they respected, had their back, and was encouraging them. And so, make opportunities for praise, even if they're small. So moving on, Taylor encountered a slightly less than stellar one-on-one experience with his manager. Now, the meeting didn't necessarily need to be with his manager. It could have been with a coworker, a mentor, or anyone really. But the fact that it was his manager was really crucial because managers should be advocates for their developers. So we need to remember, though, that Taylor's manager here probably wasn't intentionally being malicious. He just wanted a status update. And given the circumstances of the project, he was likely under a lot of pressure as well. So if we step into the shoes of his manager here, or anyone that has to host a one-on-one meeting, how could we better care for that person that's across from us? Well, we can start by being flexible with our time, which is to say we need to understand that we're meeting with people and things won't always go according to our plan. So you may, and you should have a plan for meetings that you're attending, and especially one-on-one meetings that you're hosting. But that meeting isn't just for you. The person you're meeting with is going to be coming with their own expectations and objectives and things that they want to see come out of this meeting. And as a leader, it's your responsibility to practice being flexible so that your report or your peer or whoever you're meeting with can feel comfortable coming to you with their concerns, with their issues, or with just some exciting news that they have to share. So if there's an important matter the other person wants to discuss, try to make some room for it. Or if they have some frustrations and problems that they need addressed, try to find out what you can do to help. By doing these things, even just a little bit, it'll make for a much stronger relationship with whoever you're meeting with. So these ideas tie into the concept of promoting psychological safety. So back in 2012, Google did a study called Project Aristotle. It was aimed at discovering what made certain engineering teams more effective than others. Their study surveyed over 100 teams and took several years, but what they found was that a key indicator of the most effective teams was that they were psychologically safe. But what does that mean? What is psychological safety? Well, in the realm of psychology, it's a trait for groups of people that is marked by high average social sensitivity or conversational turn-taking. But now if you're like me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, it doesn't make it any clearer. So to put it more plainly, it means that you have a sense of confidence that if you speak up, your team will not embarrass, reject, or punish you for sharing your ideas. So if all of the members of your team feel confident that they can speak up in meetings and speak up during your stand-ups and share their ideas, then you have a hallmark of being a psychologically safe team. But unfortunately, this isn't the reality for many developers working throughout our industry. How does this tie into one-on-ones, though? Well, for one-on-one meetings specifically, if you're in a position to be leading such a meeting, that means that you have some influence. And as someone with influence, it's your responsibility to work to make sure that you're developing a psychologically safe environment for your teammates, especially within your sphere of influence. So if you work to ensure that your teammates can come to you and feel comfortable speaking up and steering the content of your meetings, then that goes a long way to making sure that they feel comfortable speaking up in all circumstances. And that's because they'll know that you have their back and you value that they have their own opinions and that they have things that they want to share and need to share. And establishing this culture is really critical to developers feeling cared for and being able to innovate, right? Because if your developers don't feel that they can share their ideas, then you're missing out on a whole swath of potentially radical and novel ideas that could change the trajectory of your company. So beyond ensuring that your team feels comfortable speaking up, though, you also need to make sure that you're hearing what they're not telling you explicitly. So there's a quote by management guru Peter F. Drucker that says, "The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said." So this quote is often recited in context of talking about nonverbal communication. But it also applies to our verbal communication. Right? If you're meeting with a coworker that's complaining about an issue, but not explicitly saying, hey, this needs to be fixed, or I want to see this fixed, you can still infer that something needs to be done about it, right? Or maybe it isn't that obvious, but you have a coworker that every time you talk to him, he seems really frustrated. He doesn't really talk about what he's frustrated about, but he just seems really down and negative all the time. And you've noticed that he's been staying late. In both of these cases, you can identify ways to help, to care for each other without it being explicitly asked for. In the first case, whatever's bothering your coworker, go find out if fixing it would make it better. And if it would, try to escalate it to someone that has the power to fix it, or if you're able to, fix it yourself. In the latter scenario, ask your coworker if you can help pick up some of their work to lighten the load so they don't have to stay late. Or if that's not possible because you have too much on your plate already, go to their manager, ask about getting more developers to help with the project, or maybe even just adjusting some expectations around when things need to be delivered. The point is that there are likely opportunities all around you to help out and care for your teammates if you just look for them. Hear what they're not saying to you directly. So let's consider Taylor's earlier meeting. Instead of immediately asking about feature X, which admittedly was behind schedule and a high priority, what if Taylor's manager had started their conversation with, hey, I have something I'd like to talk about, but first, is there anything you'd like to discuss? This way, Taylor knows that there's a conversation that needs to be had, but he's also able to discuss his frustrations. With the manager setting some context for his direct report, it's showing them flexibility. Now, it's important that the manager doesn't say something like, I have something very important that we need to talk about. Because that might sway Taylor to think, oh, are the things that I need to talk about really that important? On the flip side of the coin, though, Taylor also needs to recognize that his manager does have something that he needs to talk about and needs to be addressed. And so caring goes both ways, and it's up for both parties to recognize this. If they run out of time to discuss the items that the manager originally wanted to talk about, then Taylor should offer to have another meeting. Many of us have likely experienced one-sided relationships before, and they're usually not very fun. So we need to work to make sure that we're not developing those same type of relationships in the office. Now you might question at this point if this always makes sense. Like, what if the business topic is blocking another team and Taylor's frustrations aren't able to be resolved quickly? Well, as with most things in software engineering and the world in general, the answer is it depends, right? You'll need to use your best judgment. But I would encourage you to not brush off small issues for too long because they have a tendency to compound into something much larger. As illustrated in the opening story, right, many small annoyances can easily take down one of your developers and make them much less productive. And we don't want that. Now, there's definitely plenty more that can be said about meetings here, but I want to end this portion of the talk with another tip. That is, try going for a walk. If you've never done it before, try taking a walk during your meetings. Right? Anecdotally speaking, walks can feel a lot more relaxed and laid back than sitting across a table from someone in a cold conference room. Right? Especially if you have something difficult to discuss, it can be much easier to broach that subject when you're looking at some trees out in nature or some cool architecture or even just your feet. Instead of sitting across from your manager in a cold conference room where they have most of the control. And so, while this works with some people, taking a walk, it may not work for others. You need to communicate with each other to find a structure that's going to be effective for you and whoever you're meeting with. If structured effectively, these meetings should leave both of you feeling fulfilled and valued. And if they're not, then you should find a way to adjust them, to make them valuable, or cancel it altogether. No one says that you have to do meetings like this. When you provide flexible, safe meetings for your teammates and direct reports, it becomes much easier for you to identify growing areas of concern and work to correct them before they spiral out of control. And likewise, building a safe environment for everyone on your team and letting them speak their minds reduces the problems that they're facing and lets your developers work more effectively and with less stress. Okay, so at this point, we've talked about two specific work-related areas that we can focus on caring more in. But what about our other day-to-day activities? If you're a developer or an individual contributor, hopefully you spend a good amount of time not doing reviews and not going to meetings. So how can you care for your teammates when you're getting lunch or chatting about some tech or simply during a lull in the day if you're lucky enough to have one? Well, my first tip is to close the shop. And by that, I mean is talk about stuff other than work and work-related topics for a little bit. As high-performing and motivated individuals, it can be really easy for us to just talk shop all the time. In the tech industry in particular, I've met tons of people that love what they do, and that's fantastic. I'm super, super happy about it. But because of that, we can often miss out on chances to build memories and better relationships by delving deeper and finding out more about the people that we know. And because of that, we're also missing out on chances to build stronger teams that can collaborate better and build better products. So every now and then, we should take some time to inquire about family and friends, maybe discuss some local events, ask about their hobbies, or maybe talk about your favorite Netflix series. So the possibilities are really almost endless. And showing that you care about a person outside of their role at the office goes a long way towards showing and developing a psychologically safe work environment, because it shows that you value them as a person and not just as someone that can churn out code. So this in turn, like I mentioned earlier, makes it easier to collaborate and innovate on the projects you're working on, because you'll know that others care about you and are not going to attack you personally when they're disagreeing with you or don't see the things the same way as you. And that frees you to have much more radical and innovative conversations about how you approach problems. So remember Taylor's lunch conversation from before? What if instead of talking about new thing JS all lunch, his coworkers began by finding out how everyone's weekend was? Maybe Taylor could open up about how he's been feeling with the project and commiserate with the rest of the team if they're feeling the same way. Or if that's too personal, you can at least sit back and hear about the lives of his coworkers, which is probably going to be less stressful than feeling like you're behind the curve because you haven't learned the latest JavaScript framework. This isn't to say you shouldn't ever talk about work, but simply try to put non-work, non-tech things at the forefront every now and then. If you hit a lull in conversation, then by all means, feel free to bring up work topics, especially if they're of interest to you and your coworkers outside of the office. So more accurately, I guess you should close the shop occasionally. You don't have to shut it down permanently. And I think you'll be surprised by how easy it is to find other things to talk about and connect with your teammates on. And because of that, how much more comfortable you will feel around your teammates in discussing your ideas. And once you've begun to understand them apart from their work, all this will feel much more natural. So at this point, it can feel like I've been prescribing a bunch of steps or a recipe to build a caring team, but that's not really my goal here. The goal is to provide some examples and ideas and thoughts about how we can translate this really amorphous concept of caring into some concrete actions that we can try to implement and practice in our own day-to-day work. So remember, caring is an action, and we can show it through things like being mindful of our tone in our review comments, and practicing flexibility with our meetings, and talking about our lives outside of the office a little bit. So behind all of this lies an idea about relationship building that the author Bob Goff expresses really simply in his book called Love Does. He says, you don't need a plan, you just need to be present. But what does it mean to be present? It means that you need to understand the intersection of the unique people you're working with, yourself, and your work environment. Or to put that slightly different, you need to comprehend the effect of the interactions that you're having on the people in your workplace. The present isn't really talking about a specific moment or a place in time, as it is talking about the setting and background that you find yourself working in. Being present allows you to understand that your review comment might be interpreted negatively by your teammate. Or understand that the person you're meeting with is looking worn out and probably needs a break or a day off. Or it lets you know that your team is ready to celebrate a victory. And that last item is important because it would be really easy to get the idea that caring for people only matters when bad thing happens, especially because of the content of this talk so far. But that's not true. Caring for people also matters in the good times, as accomplishments and celebrations should also be shared with each other. If you're only around and showing support for your teammate when bad stuff happens, then really you're not much more than a bad omen. And that's not a great thing to be. So remember how Taylor kind of just sulked back to his desk after lunch? Most of us have likely seen coworkers in a similar situation before, whether it's increased sighing, longer stares off into space, or maybe just abnormal quietness. There are usually signs when folks are feeling down, and especially about their job. By being present with someone and actively giving them some attention from time to time, you can begin to notice when things seem off. And in those moments, it's often much easier for us to pretend that it doesn't exist or that we don't see it. But instead, I would encourage you to take a moment, take a deep breath, and then lean into your coworker and say, hey, are you doing okay? Is there anything that you'd like to talk about? That's it. Like sometimes that's all it takes to turn someone's entire day, week, or month around. They might not have anything that they want to talk about, and that's totally okay. Don't push it. Just let them know that you're available and that you care about them outside of the office as well. So as a brief example, one of the closest coworkers I've ever worked with loved Martinelli's apple juice, but they didn't stock it in the building that we worked in, which I know is a strictly Silicon Valley problem. But they did stock it in the building across our campus, and so we'd often go for a walk to get some apple juice. And on this walk, which only took a couple of minutes, was a chance for us to break up the day and talk openly about whatever we wanted, whatever was on our mind. If we were frustrated, we could vent about it. If we were excited, we could speak enthusiastically. But what made it special and important was that there was never an expectation that we had to talk about stuff, just an open invitation. Right? And so I could stop by his desk, and if I was having a rough day, I could say, hey, you want to go get some apple juice? And on the walk, we could talk about whatever the frustrations were. Or if we were excited, like an awesome conference was coming up, or we just shipped a really cool new feature, we could say, hey, want to go get some apple juice? And we could do that and talk about it along the way. And that difference between an expectation and an invitation to talk makes a world of difference. There's a sense that I had someone I could talk to if needed, but I could also keep to myself if I wanted. And this went the other direction as well. He could talk if he needed and share as well. And those walks helped us find our own bearings, sometimes put things in perspective when we were too close to problems in the workplace, and overall just made the working environment much more comfortable for us. So all this leads me to my final word of advice here, and that is be available and be open. When I asked several managers and developers what they thought developers should do to be more caring and empathetic and supportive, about half of them said something along the lines of be available for your teammates and be open in your responses to them. So practically this means make sure you have time to meet with your teammates and share helpful answers when they come to you. The reasoning here is that if you're available or never available, then it makes it seem like you're too busy or too important to deal with whatever your coworkers have on their minds. If you have to have lots of meetings, then just make it very clear to your teammates that you would prioritize requests from them to meet. By being available, you show that you're approachable and that you care about them, especially because time is one of our most valuable assets. And so setting some of it aside for your team is going to grow a lot of trust there. And if you're open when you do respond to them, this builds a lot of confidence and respect from them. Most developers are astute people, right? We can tell when folks aren't giving us the whole story or are holding back. And when you do that in the workplace, it sows distrust. So go above and beyond to be helpful in your responses and try to give until they seem satisfied. I know for myself this can be really difficult, especially when I'm under pressure to deliver a project or just have lots of meetings to go to. But I found that taking the time to be available and open for my teammates not only builds better relationships, but also empowers them. Giving your time and honest answers transfers knowledge from yourself to your team, which helps you scale your own effectiveness, and it lets them know that you trust them to use the knowledge that you're giving them wisely, and that they're valuable enough for you to devote time to them, which will build their confidence not just in you, but in themselves as well. So building trust and confidence while scaling your effectiveness in the workplace sounds like a great deal to me. But to this advice, though, I would add, be encouraging. So as with praise in the review process, a little bit of encouragement goes a long way. If a junior developer comes to you with questions about a feature, end your conversation by telling them how excited you are to see how it turns out. If you're working through a hard problem with a peer, mention how thankful you are that they're working on it with you. Or if you find yourself asking a lot of questions from the lead engineer on your team, just let them know that you're thankful and that their help is actually benefiting you. We often know that we're doing good work, and many of us are expected to do good work, which is why we have jobs. But just because it is expected does not mean that it shouldn't be encouraged and recognized. It takes very little energy to say some encouraging words every now and then, but it imparts a tremendous amount of energy to those that hear it. So to wrap up, I want to mention a quote from the paragon of Silicon Valley, Steve Jobs. He once said, "Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people." He could have ended that quote by just saying, "by a team." But I think that last word, people, deserves special emphasis because it is absolutely critical for us to recognize what it can mean. We're all people first. We're not software developers, product managers, or even senior UI engineers. Those titles might be part of how we think about ourselves and how we introduce ourselves to others, but they aren't part of our core being. Being human is, and it's something that we all have in common. And so this highlights that these issues will affect everyone you will ever work with, regardless of their gender, race, ethnicity, religion, and so on. If someone on your team needs a little extra support for a time, give it to them. Don't judge them, support them. So I urge you all to put forth just an extra little bit of effort to care for your teammates a little more, your fellow developers, your fellow people. And maybe instead of us focusing on getting shit done, as we are oft to say in this industry, we focus on growing people first. So my hope is that this talk has helped show that caring doesn't require a lot of fancy process or a complete change of your personality, but it does require you to put yourself in the shoes of the people that you're working with and to grasp each person's individuality. So this little bit of effort to make your teammates feel cared for is going to help them grow so much more than they ever otherwise would. And if we want our industry to be sustainable and retain talented employees, then we need to ensure that we're investing in people's growth. And from that labor, we can begin to go farther than we ever have before in both our work and beyond, because despite what we may think, there is so much more to this life than just working. Thank you.